She was just a quiet girl sitting in seat 16A on a military transport flight, the kind of aircraft built more for function than comfort, its interior lined with dull gray panels, exposed rivets, and the constant low hum of engines that made conversation feel unnecessary. She wore simple clothes, no insignia, no badges, no uniform that might hint at authority or importance. Her hair was neatly tied back, her posture calm, almost unremarkable. Around her, passengers shifted in their seats, some scrolling through phones, others whispering or dozing off, assuming she was just another civilian allowed passage on a routine military transfer. No one paid her special attention, because there was nothing on the surface that demanded it. No rank shone on her shoulders, no medals rested on her chest, and no one addressed her with the formality usually reserved for Hive. Al, you personnel. Yet beneath that quiet presence was a history written not in headlines, but in encrypted files, classified briefings, and mission rooms where the doors stayed locked and the conversations never left the walls. What the other passengers didn't know was that this girl carried a call sign, a name that existed only within secure channels, a name spoken with caution and respect by those who understood what it represented. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was powerful, earned through years of precision, intelligence, and decisions that had changed the outcome of operations most people would never hear about. As the aircraft cruised steadily through restricted airspace, far above the clouds, the atmosphere in the cockpit shifted. The routine radio chatter, calm, procedural, almost monotonous, suddenly tightened. A new transmission cut through the static, sharp and authoritative, coming from fast, moving escorts slicing through the sky nearby. F-35 fighter jets, the most advanced aircraft in the world, had locked onto the transport's flight path as part of a standard security protocol. Identification was requested, voice firm but controlled. Inside the transport, most passengers barely noticed, assuming it was just another routine check, something the military handled countless times a day. But in the cockpit, the pilots exchanged a brief glance, one loaded with understanding. The transport pilot responded with the usual codes, flight numbers, and clearance details, his voice steady, professional. There was a pause on the line, longer than normal, heavy with unspoken evaluation. Then, almost casually, as if reading from a checklist, the pilot added one more piece of information, her call sign. The moment the words left his mouth, the air seemed to freeze. On the other end of the radio, silence followed, not the crackling static of a lost signal, but a deliberate, stunned quiet. The F-35 pilots knew that call sign. They had seen it referenced in mission simulations, operational briefings, and after action reports that analyzed success and failure down to the smallest detail. That call sign belonged to someone whose strategic insight had shaped missions they trusted with their lives, someone whose decisions had redirected aircraft, altered targets, and prevented losses without ever stepping into the spotlight. Within seconds, the tone of the radio communication changed completely. Formality deepened, respect sharpened every word. Clearances were granted instantly, escort formations adjusted with precision, and the fighters moved into position, not out of suspicion, but out of honor. Back in the cabin, the girl in seat 16 felt the subtle shift through the vibration of the aircraft and the slight change in engine pitch. She didn't react. She didn't look around to see if anyone had noticed. Her expression remained composed, eyes focused ahead, as if this was just another flight, another routine transition between places where her presence mattered far more than her appearance. The passengers around her remained unaware, still seeing only a quiet girl in a numbered seat, never realizing that above them, cutting through the sky at supersonic speed, elite fighter pilots had just paused, not out of protocol, but out of recognition. What shocked everyone on board wasn't a sudden announcement or dramatic reveal, but the invisible moment when the sky itself acknowledged her, when power and authority bowed not to rank or uniform, but to a name earned through intellect, discipline, and unwavering responsibility, proving once again that the most extraordinary people often look the most ordinary, and that true influence doesn't announce itself. It moves silently, confidently, and leaves its mark long before anyone realizes it was ever there. When the pilot calmly spoke her call sign over the radio, the cockpit went silent in a way that every experienced aviator instantly recognizes, not the silence of a technical glitch or a drop signal, but the heavy, deliberate pause that follows unexpected significance. The word itself seemed to linger in the air, echoing faintly through headsets and instrument panels, as if even the aircraft systems had taken notice. That call sign was not ordinary, not a label assigned casually or chosen for flair. It was a name forged over years of high-pressure decisions, countless simulations, and moments where failure was not an option. It belonged to someone referenced in classified briefings that began with locked doors and ended with shredded notes, someone whose analyses were projected onto secure screens and debated by senior commanders and elite pilots alike. In combat simulations, her scenarios were known for their brutal realism, designed to expose weaknesses before the enemy ever could. In joint operations, her insights had bridged gaps between air, ground, and intelligence units, aligning moving parts into a single, precise outcome. The F-35 pilots listening on the other end of the transmission recognized the call sign instantly, not because it was famous, but because it was trusted. They had seen it attached to mission packets that determined fuel loads, ingress routes, timing windows, and contingency plans. They had flown into hostile airspace guided by frameworks she had helped design, relying on her understanding of threat behavior, radar patterns, and human unpredictability. In that moment, the realization hit with unexpected clarity. This was not a random civilian being escorted through restricted airspace, and not merely a passenger along for the ride. This was a strategic mind, someone whose work lived in the margins of their checklists and the assumptions behind their maneuvers, someone who had shaped the very missions they now executed at supersonic speed. The shift was immediate and unmistakable. Air traffic control frequencies adjusted as clearances were granted without hesitation, corridors opening smoothly through layers of controlled airspace that usually required multiple confirmations. The escorting F-35 subtly altered their formation, tightening spacing, refining angles, not out of caution but out of respect, as if acknowledging an unseen authority moving within the transport aircraft they guarded. Voices over the radio grew more formal, more precise, stripped of casual phrasing, each word chosen carefully. Inside the cockpit of the transport, the pilots maintained their composure, but the weight of the moment settled in. They understood the rarity of what was happening, the unspoken hierarchy being recognized not by rank insignia or visible command, but by intellectual contribution and operational impact. Outside, the sky remained unchanged, vast, blue, indifferent, but within it, an invisible acknowledgement rippled across frequencies and formations. Respect filled the skies not as a dramatic gesture, but as a quiet alignment of professionals who understood the value of the mind behind the mission. And while the girl in seat 16A remained unseen and unnamed to most, her call sign traveled ahead of her, opening paths, commanding deference, and reminding everyone listening that true authority in modern warfare often resides not in the cockpit or the uniform, but in the strategic brilliance that makes every flight possible and every pilot safer long before wheels ever leave the ground. She wasn't famous, and that was by design, because in her world recognition was a liability and anonymity was a shield, a necessary layer of protection for work that mattered far beyond public applause. Her name never appeared in press briefings, documentaries, or ceremonial speeches, and no biography would ever line bookstore shelves with her story neatly summarized. Yet her impact was real in ways that could not be erased, measured not in headlines but in outcomes, missions that returned intact, conflicts that never escalated, lives that were quietly spared. Because someone had seen the problem before it became a disaster. She represented a new era, one where brilliance outranked appearances and authority no longer depended on the symbols people expected to see. In that era, respect was earned not by the weight of medals or the sharpness of a uniform, but by clarity of thought, depth of understanding, and the ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. Seat 16A was just a number printed on a faded placard, identical to dozens of others bolted to the aircraft's floor, but to her it was merely a place to sit between responsibilities, a temporary pause between rooms where decisions carried consequences that echoed across continents. Her call sign, however, was history, quiet, undocumented history that lived in secure networks, encrypted transmissions, and the shared memory of professionals who understood exactly what it meant. It was a name attached to frameworks that redefined how missions were planned, to risk assessments that challenged outdated assumptions, and to strategies that valued precision over bravado. Somewhere above the clouds, as sunlight reflected off angular wings and advanced sensors scanned the airspace with tireless accuracy, the world's most advanced fighter jets had just reminded everyone of a truth that rarely made it into recruitment posters or patriotic speeches, that the most powerful force in modern warfare is not noise or spectacle, but understanding. The pilots guiding those aircraft had spent years mastering their machines, trusting not only the technology beneath their hands, but the unseen intelligence that informed every maneuver, and in recognizing her call sign, they acknowledged the mind that had helped make their confidence possible. Inside the transport, nothing outwardly dramatic happened, no applause, no announcement, no revealing glance. But that was fitting, because her influence had never relied on visibility. It moved quietly, shaping systems rather than seeking credit, ensuring that when action was required, it was decisive and informed rather than reactive and reckless. She embodied the reality that progress often arrives without ceremony, carried forward by individuals who are content to let the work speak for itself. As the aircraft continued its steady course and the escorts maintained their silent vigil, the moment passed, unnoticed by most and unforgettable to those who understood it. In that passing moment lay a lesson written not in slogans but in silence. Never underestimate the quiet ones, because they are often the ones who see the whole board, who think 10 steps ahead, and who change the course of events without ever needing the world to know their name. She wasn't famous, and that absence of fame was not an accident but a requirement of the world she operated in. A world where visibility could compromise outcomes and recognition could distort priorities. Her name wasn't public, never spoken on news channels or printed in official statements, never celebrated in ceremonies or reduced to sound bites for mass consumption. Yet, her impact was undeniably real, woven deeply into decisions that shaped operations long before they unfolded and long after they concluded. She represented a new era, one where brilliance outranked appearances, where the sharpness of the mind mattered more than the cut of a uniform, and where respect was earned through precision, foresight, and accountability rather than worn as decoration on a chest. In this era, authority did not shout, it calculated. It did not demand attention, it commanded trust. Seat 16A was just a number, a simple designation stamped onto metal and fabric, indistinguishable from any other seat in the aircraft, a temporary place between departures and arrivals. To anyone watching, it meant nothing. But her call sign was history, not the kind written in textbooks or etched into monuments, but the kind carried quietly by professionals who understood what it meant to survive because someone, somewhere, had thought further ahead than everyone else. That call sign lived in encrypted systems, in simulation data refined again and again until error margins disappeared, in contingency plans that anticipated human unpredictability as carefully as mechanical failure. It was attached to strategies that prevented escalation, to mission designs that reduced risk without sacrificing effectiveness, and to decisions that balanced force with restraint at moments when the margin for error was razor thin. Somewhere above the clouds, where sunlight glinted off composite wings and sensors scanned the sky with inhuman patience, the world's most advanced fighter jets had just reminded everyone of a truth that rarely finds its way into heroic narratives, that power does not always announce itself with noise or spectacle. The pilots flying those aircraft, trained to operate at the edge of possibility, understood that their confidence did not come solely from technology or skill, but from the invisible architecture of intelligence and planning beneath every sortie. In recognizing her call sign, they acknowledged not a rank, not a title, but a mind whose work had shaped the environment in which they operated, whose insight had quietly tilted odds in their favor. Before engines ever ignited, inside the transport aircraft there was no dramatic reveal, no shift in posture, no acknowledgement demanded or expected. She remained exactly as she had been, calm, composed, anonymous, because that was how true influence often moved. It didn't seek validation, didn't pause for recognition, and didn't require witnesses. It existed to serve a purpose larger than personal identity. As the aircraft continued its steady path and the escorts maintained their silent formation, the moment passed almost unnoticed, dissolving back into routine for those who did not understand it, while remaining indelible for those who did. And in that quiet passing was the final lesson, the closing truth of her story. Never underestimate the quiet ones, because they are often the architects of outcomes you will never see, the minds shaping futures without ever stepping into the light, the individuals whose greatest strength is not how loudly they are seen, but how deeply they are trusted.